Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's about 5 o'clock here in Indiana. I've been sitting here all day kind of grading papers and observing the discussions in the forums, especially the logical fallacy ones, and especially the Fiorina one. So I'm going to give you a little help on that one in just a little bit because I appreciate the fact that you're all working pretty hard on that one and you're hitting all around the answer. But I'll talk about that in a second. First off, let me talk about the Fallacy Hunt project. I hope you understand. I hope it's clear, and if it isn't clear, now let me make it clear. I'm not expecting us to master this stuff. This is not a logic class, and it's not a philosophy class, and I don't expect us to come out of this class being experts in logical fallacies. But it is good to learn to look for these things because they're everywhere, and to learn to call them by name, because that's a kind of a shorthand that other educated people can recognize. It's like any other somewhat specialized field. If you know the jargon, you can talk to other people in the field about it. Remember, this is a class in rhetoric, and that means that we're looking at not just what is said and written, but how it is said and written, because how something is presented makes a huge difference on the way the audience perceives it. I could say one thing one way and say the same thing another way, and my audience will find one way preferable over the other, and I have to be aware of not just what I'm saying, but how I'm presenting my ideas. That's the art of rhetoric. You say what you mean, but you also have to pay attention to how you're saying something. So the main purpose of this, more than identifying the fallacies, and I hope we will identify some and work at it some, but the main purpose of this exercise is to look at how people say things and how we are persuaded to do things and believe things and accept things from other people. Depends an awful lot on how they're presented to us. So that's one thing. The other thing is, in terms of the citations, several of you have asked about citations. I know we haven't really covered that in this class, and so again, I just am asking you to make an attempt at it. I'm not looking for perfection. But, if you're looking at a video, then you should cite it as a video. And if you need to figure out how to cite a video, go to the Purdue OWL place that some of you found, or go to your handbook, or go to some other place. But if you're looking at a video, cite it as a video in either MLA formatting or APA formatting. If you're looking at a magazine ad, cite it as a magazine ad. And find how to do it try to find how to do it in one of those resources. It's good that you try to do some of this on your own so you're prepared to learn when we get to this in a little bit, okay? So do your best at citation. Don't just ignore it because you don't know how to do it. If you don't know how to do it, try to figure it out. And if you try to figure it out, that's all I'm asking. I'm not looking for perfection. And I won't grade these on the basis of whether they're perfect or not. I will grade them on the basis of whether or not you attempt to cite your stuff. Okay? And if you want to send me an email or discuss in the forum, you want to ask a question in the forum, don't send me private emails. Ask your question in the forum, and I'll do my best to help you. But I don't want you to belabor, I don't want you to miss the point of why we're doing this because you're too concerned about citations or too concerned about getting the names right. Those are important, but more important than that is looking at how things are said and how you're manipulated, and how you can stop being manipulated. So that's the real point of this. I know some of you are working very hard and in very good faith, and I really appreciate that. More than I can probably say to you right now, because I think it's critical work. It's citizens learning to think for themselves is critical to stopping, and excuse my French, the bullshit that's going on in our nation and especially in our government. We can't stop it till we pay attention, and it won't stop until we start paying attention. And they know we're not paying attention, so they do whatever they want because they know we're not paying attention. So if we can start paying attention, we've got a chance of changing things. As long as we remain ignorant, we have no chance. We will be led like sheep, literally, possibly to a slaughter. So that's enough preaching. Let me talk about the Fiorina thing. I've been dropping hints all week, and I know a couple of you have noticed my hints and tried to put them together, and I very much appreciate that. What I was hoping to have happen, and I didn't tell you this because I wanted you to try on your own, because things you learn for yourself, ladies and gentlemen, are so much more lasting than knowledge you get from me or a textbook or anything else. So I wanted you to work at it on your own. But I didn't want to leave you completely foundering. So what I was hoping by the hints that I dropped to several folks on the forums, that someone would think to take my hints and put them together and Google the name of the fallacy, because the fallacy that we're after here is not on any of the charts that you have, although it's a very, very, very common one, which is why I picked that one, because I thought, anybody who was taking my hints and putting them together, you'd be able to find it quickly on the internet. That's why I picked an easy one to do this experiment with. So the Fiorina video, at the very beginning, she tells you what she's going to do. She announces her intention. That's like her thesis statement. What she gives you there is a little essay, and her thesis statement is, I want to link these two things. The word link is important and is chosen deliberately, either by Fiorina or more likely by her speechwriters, but you can bet that she was prepared for this question, because her answer is quite clearly a prepared answer. So she says, I want to link two things. Okay? Well, that's code for the fact I think these two things are similar in some way. Okay? You don't need me to do this. The word link tells you that the speaker is going to say, I'm putting these two things together in the hopes that you'll come to the conclusion, you, the listener, will come to the conclusion that there's something alike. Okay? So she says, I want to link these two things, and then she lists the two things. And a couple of you quite rightly noticed Iran and Planned Parenthood are the two things she's linking. And she's linking them because she wants to make a comparison. She wants to say one is like the other. Well, okay, there's your clue. When you say one thing is like another thing, you're making an analogy, A-N-A-L-O-G-Y, analogy. That's a kind of a comparison. When I compare two things, I'm saying A is like B, or, well, you've heard me say, or if you haven't, you will, building an essay is like building a doghouse. That's an analogy. And I think it's a true analogy, because there are certain things in putting together a doghouse, certain tools, certain raw materials, certain procedures, certain plans, and stuff like that. Although the tools and plans and procedures are different when you build an essay, the fact of construction of the two things is a similar process. You collect your material, you get your tools, you put the thing together, you let it go. So that's an analogy. So what Fiorina is doing, and she's quite clear by saying, I want to link these two things. She's saying there is an analogy between these two things. These two things are alike in some ways. Iran is like Planned Parenthood. That's the underlying strategy of her comment. And she's hoping that you'll go ahead and connect the two for her. Okay, so she's making an analogy between the two things. So your question is, your analysis, your procedure here, the way you unpack this rhetoric is, okay, the word link tells me she's putting two things together to compare them. And she's comparing them because she thinks they're alike in some way. So your question is, then how is Iran like Planned Parenthood? Because that's the conclusion that she means you to reach. Iran is like Planned Parenthood. Therefore, considering the equation that works in mathematics, the distributive equation in mathematics, If Iran is like Planned Parenthood, then something that happens in Iran is like something that happens in Planned Parenthood, and so forth. Like the distributive principle in mathematics. Things that are equal to each other, things that are equal to either things, other things are equal to each other. Okay? That's what she's doing, and it's quite clear in the way she presents it that she's intending that to happen. She's intending you, excuse me, as a listener to put those two things together and come to the conclusion that they're alike in important ways. That's the rhetoric. That's how she's saying what she wants to say. So your job as a scholar trained in logical fallacies is to say, okay, is that a true analogy? Are Iran and Planned Parenthood really alike in interesting ways? That's the leap in logic that she's hoping you'll skip over, that her listeners, including us, will skip over. So if the analogy doesn't work, then it's not a true analogy. It's another kind of analogy, and I'm not going to tell you the word because you can figure it out for yourselves by now. So I was hoping that somebody might Google, take my clues and put them together and Google it, but I know you're all working really hard and you don't have a lot of time, and I didn't want to leave you struggling over the weekend. So there's your answer. Does the analogy work or not? If it does work, it's a true one. If it doesn't work, it's another kind of one. And if it's the other kind of one, then it's a logical fallacy. A true analogy is not a fallacy. A true analogy is an analogy. Yes, building an essay is kind of like building a doghouse in certain ways. That's a true analogy. The other kind of analogy that's fallacious is an analogy that's not true. Okay, I've practically given it away now. Let me give you another example of an analogy. A classic one, if you know the speech, I Have a Dream by Martin Luther King. And if you don't, you should. And if nobody knows it, maybe we'll study it a little bit. But he says at one point, we have come to the Capitol to cash a blank check. And so he goes on, and it's an extended analogy, but it's beautifully, beautifully done, because King, among other things, was a very fine speaker and writer, and he knew all about this stuff and knew how to use it. So he makes the analogy that the broken promises that he sees, the country has made promises to African American people which they have not kept. And so, I'm sorry, I said blank check, I meant bad check, sorry. So the government, according to King, has made promises to African Americans that they haven't kept, which is a great big concept. But he says that's kind of like going to the bank and trying to cash a bad check. If someone gives you a check and you go to the bank and there's no money in the account, you can't cash the check, which is a little thing that everybody can understand. This is the beauty of a good analogy. You can take a great big thing like broken promises and historical movements and civil rights. You can take a great big thing like that, which is hard to talk about because it's so complex, and you can say to your listener or your reader, well, it's kind of like going to the bank with a bad check and trying to cash a bad check, which has happened to all of us. If you can establish that analogy, then the reader or the listener can say, oh yeah, that's happened to me. I went to the bank to cash a check and it was a bad check. So I can see how, okay, the promise is made and not kept. That's kind of like giving someone a bad check. And the point is made by the skill of the writer using the analogy. Speechwriters do this all the time, and they're very good at it. But unfortunately, speechwriters are very good at misusing it and abusing an analogy to create lies, to create a connection where there is none. So that was, I'm sorry it went on for so long, but I know some of you have been working very hard, and I wanted to help you out. So she says, I want to link these two things. She's saying, I'm going to make an analogy between these two things. These two things are alike in important ways. Like a broken promise is like a bad check, or like building a doghouse is like building an essay. So she says, Iran and Planned Parenthood are alike in important ways that are worth talking about. So, is that true? When you come along as a reader or a listener to that speech, you would know what she's doing, and you'd recognize that she's making an analogy, and then you analyze the analogy on basis of whether it works or not. Okay? So that's the answer to the Fiorina, the first part of the Fiorina thing. The second one, and all of you got that, is clearly a play on emotions. The ad hominem thing, I really don't think it's ad hominem, because ad hominem would be attacking the character of Obama and Clinton. She does mention them, but she doesn't really attack them. She doesn't say they're bad people because they're not watching this video. She just kind of calls them out and says if they watch this video, they would come to the same conclusions. So she mentions their name, which is not the same as ad hominem. But the appeal to emotion for sure. And the first one, you can probably now figure it out. And the main reason I chose this one was not because of the subject matter, but because she so clearly lays out her rhetorical plan. She tells exactly what she's going to do, and she's very upfront about it. But then you have to decide, does it work or not? Is it truth or not? And that's what the job of this was. So I'm pretty sure you can all answer the Fiorina discussion chat now. So I hope you have a great weekend. Again, don't worry too much about... I want you to try to cite your stuff, and I want you to try to name these things. But the main purpose is, while you're doing that, the purpose of the assignment is to get us to think about how things are presented and how things are said. All right? I've gone on way too long. So I'm going to shut up and get on out of here. Hope you have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you later. Bye.